Hi everyone, welcome back. Just to remind everyone of what we talked about last week, we focused on fiber properties and how we use those properties to identify and to ultimately classify the different fibers. From this week and moving forward from here, we are going to be talking about specific fibers and how fibers are categorized within the textile industry. So either last week or the week before that, we talked about the main two categories of fibers being natural and manufactured. So that's sort of where the split is. And now we're going to start with natural fibers. So I've highlighted that on the chart here. And within that classification, there are two types of natural fibers. There's cellulosic fibers, which are primarily from plant material or vegetative material, and protein fibers. So this chapter is going to focus on the cellulosic fibers, and within that, the fibers are classified based on the portion of the plant from which the fiber comes from. So that's going to be either the seed, the bast, or the leaf. So this chart sort of serves as an overview of where we're going over the next couple of chapters, and we'll refer back to it just to see where we are in the grand scheme of things. So just to reiterate, natural cellulosic fibers are classified by where in the plant they are derived. So seed fibers obviously come from seeds, and there's a picture here of jute and the seeds. And then there's bast fibers, and those are the ones that come from the stem or the root of the plants. So that includes flax, rami, hemp, bamboo, etc. And then there are leaf fibers, and those are actually derived from the veins or the ribs of a leaf. And examples of that are sisal and abaca. There's a couple other miscellaneous options like moss and bark. So those being the areas from the plants from which the fibers are derived. So that includes seagrass, palm fibers, and rush. Just as an aside, we're not going to get too deep on the chemical compositions related to this topic, but just note that the basic monomer or molecule of cellulose is glucose, which, if you guys remember from your chemistry classes, is sugar.
The table that you're looking at discusses natural cellulose fibers and some of the properties that are common to all cellulose fibers. The full table can be found on page 63, table 4.2, and that gives you a more thorough overview of the properties. But here you see kind of a condensed version of that. And just to talk a little bit more about some of those properties, for example, cotton, as we discussed earlier, has very good absorbency, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. We also talked about the burn test, and cellulose fibers tend to be more flammable, and that would be one of the results you would find from a burn test. They also are good electricity conductors, so there's very little static when you purchase fibers that are natural cellulose. But on the flip side, they can wrinkle badly. For example, linen, which tends to be one of those very wrinkly fabrics. So just some things to consider about those properties, both good and bad. And again, please take the time to look at page 63, where you will see the full table.
One of the most widely harvested and used natural cellulosic fibers is cotton. And I made some notes here about places in the swatch kit where you can engage with the fiber and fabrics made out of that fiber. So any of the numbers or any of the references I give you where there's an N in front of it, that's referring to the narrow samples that are in the front couple of pages of the textile kit right after the index. And then the page numbers I provide after that are regular pages beyond that. This is not every single cotton fabric that's in there, but these are areas where there's several to a page. So go take a look and, well, first off, start in the N samples and look at numbers 1, which is the actual fiber, and 2 is a yarn made out of cotton, and then N4 is a care label associated with cotton. So that's the one you'll often see with garments or or other products that are 100% cotton. And then in the regular pages there are actual samples of different fabrics that are 100% cotton. Those are the ones that I noted. Just as an aside, if you have a prior version of the textile kit, then just make sure to check the index and sort of cross-reference, because some of the page numbers may not exactly be the same. So just make sure that you're checking in the index ahead of time to ensure that you're seeing the same stuff that that correlate with the current kit. With respect to the production of cotton, on an international level, China, the US, India, and Pakistan are the primary producers of cotton. Within the United States, cotton is produced primarily in about 17 states, but mostly they come from this list right here: Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and of course, North Carolina. So this is just to give you some background as to where cotton is still being produced.
The process for harvesting cotton begins with the picking process, and historically this was all done by hand, but all of the processes and pretty much all of the processes along the way became mechanized, so even beginning with the picking process. So this is just a picture of the machines that are used to do this, and I also have a link up here to a video if you'd like to watch the entire process of using the machines to pick the cotton and to get it organized and everything thereafter. So it's not a real exciting video. There's not really any narration or any music or anything with it, but it at least allows you to view the parts of the process that engages the picking aspect of it in real time.
Once the cotton has been picked, the seed needs to be removed from the fiber, because remember, the seed is sort of the crux from where the fiber comes, but however, the seed is not actually used. The fiber kind of surrounds the cotton seed. So the two have to be removed from one another, and the cotton gin is actually the machine that does that. You might all recall from American history that the cotton gin was a pretty integral part of U.S. industrial history, but basically it has come a long way from a mechanical perspective, so now it works really, really efficiently. But it separates the seed from the fiber, and then also as part of this process, the cotton fibers are then classified based on their color and type and what have you, and they are separated into bales, just like this picture shows. Here's a link to a narrated video that discusses the history of cotton and sort of the whole story. So this is a nice video to watch, so I would take a few minutes to put that into your browser and take a look at this, and it will give you a little bit more of the background and then foray into the rest of the story of how cotton is harvested and produced. Having talked about harvesting the cotton and separating the seed from the actual fibers, and I don't know if you caught in the story, but luckily it's not a complete waste because the seed has other uses. So once the fibers and the seeds are separated from one another, the seed can go on and be used for other things, and then we can take the fiber and that can thereafter be used in fabrics and textiles. So taking a specific look here at the cotton fiber, we notice some variation within the length property that we talked about last week, and now we're going to apply that specifically to this particular fiber. But there is some variation. So as we mentioned last week, most of the natural fibers are staple fibers, meaning they're quite short. However, cotton, there are some long staple cotton fibers in addition to the regular short staple cotton fibers. So what that translates to is an effect on the fineness and strength of the yarns. So the longer staple fibers tend to be of a little bit higher quality, they're stronger. So an example of that is Pima cotton, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen Pima cotton sheets before that are available, but those are acknowledged to be a bit higher quality of cotton based on the fact that they come from a longer staple cotton fiber. Moving on to some of the other fiber properties that we talked about last week, surface contour is one of those. And you can see from the top photograph that cotton, the fiber of cotton, actually has a ribbon-like sort of twisted shape some more than others, obviously, but you can kind of get a view from this microscopic picture. And the bottom photograph shows you a microscopic view of the cross-sectional view of a cotton fiber. And we had talked about last week that they're a bit of a U shape, some of them almost forming a complete circle, so there is some variation there as well. And again, like we talked about additionally last week, we talked about how there's not exactly uniformity with the different fibers. Here's a perfect example of that. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but nevertheless, these microscopic views give you an idea of what the fibers look like at that level. These pictures give you an idea of the variation in the cotton fibers with respect to fineness and color. When you see a Hanes 100% cotton t-shirt in gleaming white in the store, there tends to be an association with cotton being naturally that white. And the pictures, especially ones, for example, in this PowerPoint earlier, kind of indicate that cotton is really, really white, which it is a bit in some circumstances, but not always necessarily. So there is quite a bit of variation in color, and you can see from the bottom photograph that it actually can be quite dark and get into the darker browns or natural khakis and taupes and those sort of shades. So and this picture is also indicative of the difference in luster. So those longer staples that we talked about just a moment ago happen to have a little more luster to them as well.
Here we are taking a look at the seed fiber of cotton, and specifically the properties of cotton. And some of these we discussed, but just to give you a little bit more information, the table can be found on page 69, table 4.3. But here you see all of the breakdowns for cotton. For example, the aesthetics, which we discussed. Luster, it's more on the matte side. The drape tends to be anywhere from soft to stiff. The texture in general for cotton is very pleasant, although the hand can be anything from smooth to rough, and that really is dependent on the staple fiber. So for example, if you have a Pima cotton, you'll have a much more smooth hand than a short staple cotton. Durability in general is good, except for the elongation aspect, which tends to be poor. And just to dovetail on that, the resiliency is also poor, as we talked about. When you stretch cotton out, it tends to stay that way, so that is not a good property of cotton. It does have excellent absorbency, as we discussed earlier, and thermal retention is poor. However, in the case of cotton, that's actually a good thing because cotton keeps you cool. It doesn't hold that heat in. So even though the rating is poor, it's not always a bad thing. And then recommended care tends to be pretty simple, so machine wash and dry for apparel, and then steaming, light steaming or dry cleaning for interior textiles.
Although cotton, as we've been talking about all this time, is a natural fiber, it has come under some scrutiny because of the environmental situation that results in the need for it to be fertilized, sometimes treated with insecticides, and then dyed by whatever different chemicals are used for that process. So it's sort of created a bit of an issue for cotton, but it's also created or paved the way for this market for organic cottons, which are supposed to be produced without any fertilizers or any of these chemicals that we're talking about. Transition cotton, which is when the entire the farming process is organic, and green cotton, where there's no chemical used. So there are these different facets of cotton production that have emerged based on the fact that it is a natural fiber, but the process in order to harvest it and get the fiber to where it can be used into different fabrics created some issues. So it sort of paved the way for the creation of these new sort of secondary markets within the cotton fiber realm, and areas where companies can sort of promote however it is that they produce the cotton, not using these different initiatives. So to sum up cotton and to indicate why we spend so much time on this particular fiber is because cotton is really everywhere. It's in a ton of the apparel that we wear. It's in bedding, sheets, towels. It's used for all kinds of things. So it's one of the more popular and widespread fibers that is used for fabrics. Additionally, it's blended with other synthetic fabrics to create fabrics that have different properties in order to meet consumer needs. So, for example, polyester helps it become a little bit more wrinkle resistant. So it's widely used, and that's why we spend so much time on this particular fiber. As we talked about, there are some negative properties associated with cotton. The absorbency can be a negative or positive depending on how you're using it, and it's not necessarily resilient like we mentioned a few moments ago, but generally speaking, it's a fabric that generally receives pretty positive reviews. The notation here regarding Cotton Incorporated, I'm sure you all have seen the commercials on television, and lately they've been featuring a fairly high-profile celebrity that's singing the Touch the Feel of Cotton song. So what that is that's a trade association, and basically the companies that produce cotton have come together to form a group, because there's the concept of power in numbers, and one company can't really effectuate a significant amount of change on their own, but as a group they can do so. And they do that because they can all benefit from the different things that the trade association can do for them, such as market research. Research is very expensive, and they can sort of pool the resources together by grouping themselves into an association to help further the researching efforts. Similarly, the lobbying efforts, where there's a voice that represents several different companies versus a voice that only represents one company by itself, is going to have a lot more persuasive ability when it comes to legislation that may affect cotton. Additionally, they engage in consumer segment profiling, and this is done for marketing and forecasting for the companies that end up ultimately selling cotton products to consumers. So they do textile testing, and again, that's really expensive for companies to bear the burden of individually, so they share the cost again by forming this trade association. These are some additional examples of seed fibers. These are not as widely used as cotton, but also cellulosic fibers nonetheless. So we're just going to briefly touch on these just to give you an idea of other types of seed fibers that are out there. So the cocoa fiber comes from the husk of coconuts, actually. So there's a picture there to kind of show you what kind of fiber we're talking about. And then the kapok fiber comes from the silk cotton tree, sometimes referred to as a kapok tree, and that has a bit more luster than cotton. And then milkweed, which you can see is actually a flower, and that fiber is soft and has more luster as well. So those are just some examples of some seed fibers apart from cotton that also might find their way into fabrics and textiles. We're going to move on to bast fibers now, which are those fibers that are taken from the root or the stem of the plants. So the first one we're going to talk about here is flax, which is the fiber that ultimately results in linen. So you can think of linen when we're talking about flax. And it is actually one of the oldest textiles. That's why I've got the picture of the Egyptians there wearing it. So it's been around for a really long time. Due to the cost of producing the fiber and fabric, it's becoming a little bit more of a prestigious fiber, you could say. But at any rate, here are some pictures here that show you the plant, the flax plant, and then the fabric that ends up resulting from the flax fiber. In your kit, N of the narrow fibers and 12 and 13 are examples of the linen fiber, and then a yarn that is manufactured from the flax fiber. So that's a good place to start on as far as feeling it. And then on pages 2 and 3 are some swatches of linen fabrics for you to feel. So go ahead and take a look at those pages in your in your kit, and so that you can feel what we're talking about. As I mentioned on the previous slide, flax comes from the stem of the plant, like all bast fibers do. And in terms of production, roughly 85% of the world's flax is produced in Europe. And the link at the bottom of the slide is to a short video that kind of depicts the flax fields and provides some interesting additional facts about the production of flax and compares it to production of a couple of other materials. But in terms of the physical structure of the fiber, it's short, and those short, well, primarily the ones that are short are referred to as tow, and then there are longer flax fibers as well, and those, similar to how cotton is, are of better quality, and those are ready for spinning directly into yarn. The surface contour is almost kind of bamboo-like. It has these little nodes within it, and with respect to color and luster, it's yellowish white to gray, and the fiber is opaque. So just like how we did for cotton, we're going to look at the specific properties of flax, and you can see some areas where flax gets particularly high marks in terms of durability and abrasion resistance and tenacity. So those are all high. The absorbency is also high. Noteworthy, the thermal retention of flax is good, and if you remember, with respect to cotton, it was poor, which is why cotton is such a cool fabric to be wearing, and it's especially good when there's heat. Flax actually traps heat a little bit more so than cotton does, so that's why it tends to be a little bit warmer. Yes, it's still used as, or considered to be, somewhat of a summer fabric, but for the reason of there being some greater thermal retention here, I actually don't really like it for summertime for that reason, because I think it tends to get a little bit hot. But apart from that, there is a general tendency towards associating flax and linen with cooler garments. The resiliency is poor, and we talked about that, and that does have some relation to the fact that it does wrinkle very easily. We talked about that last week. As far as recommended care, it's a dry clean or machine wash situation. I usually actually dry clean linen garments, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't really have too many of them anymore, but that's the recommended care for linen made from flax. In addition to the use of linen for apparel, linen is also used for interior items such as wallpaper and curtains and things of that nature. So there's quite a bit of use for linen fabric. And here you see a logo for the Masters of Linen, and that's basically the same thing as the Cotton Association, but it's based out of Europe, and that's the association where all of the companies that are engaged in the manufacturing of flax that is used in linen have sort of pooled their resources together to effectuate change and handle market research and that sort of thing, just like the Trade Association for cotton. Another bast fiber that we're going to talk about briefly here is rami, and it's also referred to as rhea, grass cloth, or China grass. And for that reason, or in association with that, it's actually mostly produced and used in Asia, and but historically it has been used there for quite some time, not as much here in the U.S. As far as properties, it has a matte luster. It's a pretty stiff fiber, resulting in stiff fabrics made from it. Has high absorbency and poor appearance retention. We're not going to spend too much time on this particular fiber, but just note that it is also a bast fiber, and that's how we're going to classify it for our purposes. We're going to talk about a couple of additional bast fibers, the first one being hemp. It's more similar to flax, and it's a little rougher and stiffer than rami. And again, it's used a great deal in Asia. It's durable and comfortable, environmentally friendly, but it is a bit stiff, and so it has low elongation. You can look at N14 on your narrow fibers to get so that you can feel the hemp fiber. And then a couple of additional bast fibers are jute, and that's what is primarily used for making like burlap bags. And so some of like organic coffees that you see are put in bags like that and that sort of thing. So that's another bast fiber. In addition, there's hibiscus, nettle, kenaf, and bamboo. So again, just giving you a couple more examples of fibers that are made from the roots or stems of plants. The final category of cellulosic fibers we're going to talk about are leaf fibers. So these actually come from the veins that you find within leaves of plants. Some examples of these types of fibers are piña from the pineapple plant, abaca from the banana tree, sisal, and the top two pictures are representative of sisal fibers, and henequen. Other natural cellulosic fibers are rush, seagrass, maize, and palm fibers, which a picture of that is on the bottom. And generally, these fibers are pretty natural feeling, and most are used for home fabrics and furnishings. Here is a visual description of the pineapple plant, and this is primarily coming from South American countries where they are focusing on fibers, the piña fibers from the pineapple plant. But this just gives you a visual idea of what that looks like. Here we have pictures of the banana leaf, and then you can see the fiber that is obtained from the veins of that leaf. So obviously the leaves are quite big, which is how these fibers are so large. You might have been thinking when we were talking about leaf fibers of just a small leaf from, you know, a tree that you'd see outside of campus or something like that. But yeah, certain foliage gets quite a bit larger, and so we can extract some pretty significant fibers from those types of leaves. So this is a good example of that. So here's our weekly recap from week 3, which covered chapter 4 here. And what we went over in this lecture PowerPoint was natural cellulosic fibers, which are classified based on what part of the plant they come from, either the seed, the bast, or the leaf. So we spent a great deal of time on cotton and also some significant time on linen and flax. Those are some of the fibers that result in fabrics that you're going to see the most of. But we also touched on a couple of others that are also options and that are becoming more commonplace as we move forward. We looked at the common properties of natural cellulosic fibers in general, and then we looked at the properties of these fibers specifically. So again, we went into cotton, flax, rami, and hemp with some detail. So those are the ones that will most likely be focused on the exam, not to completely rule out anything else, but those are the fibers that I would like for you to focus on from this particular chapter. So have a great week, everybody. There is no activity this week, so I will be posting the next lecture PowerPoint the beginning of next week, and you all enjoy, and I will talk to you then.